If you knew me before, you wouldn't even look my way. If I had the nerve to speak, you wouldn't hear what I say. Time has come and gone so fast, we're not who we used to be.
And welcome back to Sullivan's Unheard Voices. I am Shawn Sullivan. Today I kind of wanted to do my autism origin story. Now, I've done something similar before, but I kind of wanted to do it from my own perspective and my own flow. Because it started way before I remember. Now, because of trauma and experiences in my childhood, don't remember much, if anything, before the age of 16. Now, I blocked a lot of it out because, my childhood was full of trauma. My mom was a saint. Love her to death to this day. When I was 10 years old, everything changed. She came home one day complaining of a headache. She might have already been home, but one day she complained of having a headache. We rushed her to the hospital, and a few days later, she had passed. She had what is known as an aneurysm that happened sort of in the back part of the brainstem, and she was never really able to recover, and so she passed. And I remember the next week, I don't know, time is a blur back then, but I do have some distinct memories. Like I remember the funeral home, and I did not want to go see her. Like, I don't know if I just knew that my brain could not process seeing her. Like, it was bad enough seeing her in the hospital with all the bandages and non-responsive, but to see her at home or in the funeral parlor, I didn't want to. My dad forced me to. One of several catastrophic decisions my father made along the way. So at the funeral, the story goes, my dad met a woman, and several days later, freshly after my mom was put in the ground and laid to rest, my dad remarries one of the most wicked, evil people that I have ever come across. And it was just like a chapter out of the Cinderella story. She was nice to her kids, would beat my brother and I. My brother even way so worse than I. She would use manipulation tactics. She was very controlling. I remember one time she decided that she was too heavy and she wanted to go on a diet, and so she locked the fridge and locked the cupboards so that we wouldn't eat. This was probably around 11 or 12 years old, being denied food. One time, my brother decided he wanted to go on a bike ride. And for his crime of riding his bike, my stepmom was following him up the driveway and put her foot on the gas and ran him over. Luckily, he was not really harmed. But I knew and learned that day that I had to take the side of her over my brother for survival reasons. And that went on for years. Until finally one day, my dad decided to, I decided to tell my dad what was really happening and about the physical abuse. And that's when things sort of, you know, went off the rails. Because despite our confessions, he stayed with her until she cheated on him. And that's when, you know, my dad made a series of real poor decisions regarding drug use and alcoholism, all in the same time, exhibiting the same signs that a normal kid with autism would exhibit, but you couldn't tell if it was the trauma, the situation, or if, with just poverty. All of these things sort of tied into one. But I remember not fitting in high school, always having a small circle of friends, because I would act differently based on the friend I was with. And this was a defense mechanism that served me well in school, but that's how I survived, by mimicking. And I barely graduated high school. Not because I didn't quite understand, right? I had all of my homework for my math class finished in the month after I started class that year, but still kind of failed math because, I could do the work, but I couldn't get my brain to show the work. And because I couldn't show the work, I thought I was inept in math. And then the problems that I exhibited in high school sort of kept happening after high school, right? I was able to successfully navigate the military. And the military did teach me the things that I did not learn growing up, like structure, discipline, how to get along with people, how to be in a family, how to care about people. All of that stuff was really instilled upon me in the military. So then when I got done with the military, I really struggled to find jobs. I really struggled. And it's always been the interview, and that's a different podcast altogether. But basically, every time I wanted a job, I would have to go to a temp agency and start as a receptionist. And this happened like with Saby Corporation, right? So with Saby Corporation, which was a data center company I was working for at the time, they hired me as a temp as a receptionist because the receptionist was on vacation. And what I would do is I would strategically leave my resume out for the HR person to see. And to his credit, Dave Saby saw something in me and hired me directly as a temp onto a permanent job, giving me the title of project manager, not necessarily knowing where I was going to fit, but he just saw something in me and decided to take a chance. But I remember even from then on struggling to find jobs, struggling to find a lot of friends, not surely really understanding, just knowing that I'm weird or strange and I don't quite know how to exist with everybody else that's around me. And then one day I'm watching this comedy show from Jim Jeffries, and he's talking about vaccines and autism. Now, the vaccine and autism thing is not really part of the story, other than he goes into this routine about he might be autistic because of certain things. And as he describes them, they're hitting home to me. Like the lack of eye contact, some of the other things, and I can't even remember the bit now, but I just remember that was the first time the word autism ever entered into my zeitgeist. And when I saw that information about autism and what that might look like, I started doing my own research, because I do have that autism obsession, right? I will go down a rabbit hole of information until I find everything there is to find. And the more I go down my path to autism, the more it starts making sense. And I take this thing called the autism quotient test, which is something I highly encourage people to take, regardless if you're in the spectrum or not, or if you don't think you're on the spectrum or not. It's a good way of indicating that you may want to talk to somebody because it might explain some things. So anyway, I took this 50-question autism quotient test, and I kind of anticipated I would score maybe in the 20 range, right? Because I didn't really know what they were looking for. I did it honestly and openly. And imagine my surprise when I got all 50. 50 out of 50. And they highly encouraged me to talk to my doctor about autism. It's like, whoa. Now, I had to get over some gaslighting because my spouse at the time said, well, everybody has autism in them. I bet you I could take that test and it will have the same results as you. So it can't be that, right? Because I would never marry somebody who's autistic. So I'm like, oh, fine, take the test, please. So she takes the test, and to her surprise, not to mine, she scored like a 0. She's definitely not on the spectrum. So here I am with 30 out of 30 or 50 out of 50. I start to believe in my core that I'm autistic, and I'm like, okay, what do I do now? Where do I go? What do I say? What do I do? So I go to the first organization I possibly think of, and that's this nasty organization called Autism Speaks. Now, I'm not saying that Autism Speaks is all bad, right? Because they do some things that are pretty amazing for advocacy. But when I did call them and asked for help and where to go to find information, they literally said, the lady said, you're an adult, we can't help you. Not, here are some other organizations, here's a website, here's where you can get. No, you're an adult, we can't help you. So here I am. I just figured out that I'm most likely autistic, that it explains why I'm stuck in this failure circle that I'm stuck in, that explains like why I have problems with relationships. It explains why I have problems with career development, with interviews, with all kinds of aspects of my life where things just seems to always go off the rails for whatever reason. I couldn't quite figure it out. Now I have this idea that it's autism. Now, also at the time, I was working for a community college. And when I was working for this community college, an incident came up where the vice president of instruction had said something, and I didn't quite understand the ramifications of a public institution. And what I mean by ramifications of a public institution is because I really thought to my core, you work for a public institution, everything we do is a matter of public record. So if you tell me something in an official capacity, the assumption is that I'm able to share that information with the people reporting directly to me, right? Especially if you don't tell me that this is off the record. If you don't give me the guidance of this needs to not leave this room. So when ultimately I violated the trust, I'll own that. It was an autistic decision and something I learned a really harsh lesson about the realities of life. Because even though you work for the public, not everything is public knowledge. I'm going to let that one just sit. So I lost my job because, as my supervisor told me at the time, I'm too kind to be a supervisor. I created an environment where the people reporting to me could develop a pathway in their own job, right? You tell me what you need to succeed. But anyway, that's a different rabbit hole for a different story altogether. Needless to say, I was laid off from my job again, knowing that the chances of me getting a job like that again, which I loved that job, are 0.0%. So I'm likely never going to have the job that I always wanted because I was too nice for that job. I will likely never have the opportunity to work for a public institution again because it's a small world and who knows. So here I am stuck with this sensory burnout, sensory overload, knowing that I'm likely autistic, having a therapist that didn't know what autism was or really wasn't willing to help out with that regard. Plus, I lost my state health insurance when I lost the job, so I couldn't afford a therapist anyway. So I didn't have a therapist. I didn't have a job. I didn't know which direction I was going in life. I had to start over, probably likely as a receptionist again, making minimum wage at 37 years old. And I wanted to end it all. I was tired. I didn't want to end my life. I wanted to end the pain. A lot of pain. A lot of confusion, not knowing who to go to, what to say, what to see. Nobody tells you what to do when things are out of control. And I didn't have a supportive relationship at the time, right? I didn't have anybody that was nurturing, who were guiding, who were telling me, oh no, I just had this large hole in my heart and my chest, and nobody was telling me what was going on. I didn't know who to talk to, where to turn to, and so I made the decision to just check out. I was giving up. I had made the choice to make life easier for my spouse, to make life easier for everyone else, because I was just a burden and a drag on society, and I was never going to amount to anything. So I was driven to the VA. And I remember walking through those doors. And I remember starting to sort of say what was going on. And then I was admitted to the emergency room with a mental health crisis. I voluntarily admitted myself, saying, I need help. And I remember crying for the first time in a really long time. And I remember getting in there, and the first thing they do is they take your clothes from you. And they stick you in this room that's cold. And you're by yourself for hours before you're admitted upstairs. And that's something that I wish to this day we could revisit. Because the idea that if somebody is there suicidal, or somebody is having a really rough mental health day, and the only option is to stick them in a gown in a padded room by themselves to their own thoughts, which are already miserable, that's the wrong path. But again, a conversation for another time. But here I am. I'm in the VA. Alone, cold, tired, confused. And I go upstairs. And that next week changed my life. Being impatient for a week, going to all of these group therapy sessions, these one-on-one sessions. I had a doctor that was at the VA at the time. And this psychiatrist that was at the VA was on his way out. I think that was his last week doing inpatient treatment at the Seattle VA. And I met the coolest veterans up there. It was very therapeutic to be around 15 other veterans with very similar situations seeking help together. Because you build this sort of camaraderie or family sort of mentality in the military that you cannot find elsewhere. And I remember distinctly one conversation that I had with that psychiatrist, and he did something that he didn't have to do. He diagnosed me as autistic. Was right there in inpatient at the VA. And it was that moment that changed everything. Because I had always felt like that was the answer to all of my questions. But what happens with the autistic mind is when you're presented with something that you think might be the case, the medical system has gaslit you into thinking there's something or nothing wrong with you for so long that you don't trust that initial gut reaction, right? My doctors used to think I was crazy because I have dyspraxia. Now, when I go to the doctor and I tell them I have dyspraxia, it helps alleviate some of the concerns, right? Because they're like, do you have any pain in your lower back? Well, no, but I have dyspraxia, so I have pain here, but it could be pain in the lower back. But because my nerve endings are so messed up and my body sends off weird signals about pain, that it's usually 6 inches to 12 inches away from the spot it actually hurts, because that's what dyspraxia is. So now I'm discharged from the VA hospital. I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I can take the next 4 months and go through intensive therapy. Intensive. I was there 3 days a week at the VA. 2 days a week with an individual therapist, 3 days a week with group, and it saved my life. Because I finally had an opportunity to talk to somebody about what was going on. And I finally had an opportunity to share everything, but at the same time also receive information that sort of validated my life's experiences. And that started me down the pathway towards autism research. And that's because even after you receive a diagnosis, right? And you receive that validation, there is no next steps. Nobody openly talks about who to see next, what to do with this newfound information. Nobody talks to you about skills regression. Nobody talks to you about unmasking. Nobody talks to you about seeing the trees through the forest. Nobody talks to you about all this stuff unless you seek out people that know, and lucky to get a therapist like I got who completely understands and helps to translate. Around this same time, I stumble across the Autism Society of Oregon. Game changer. They had information about what to expect next. What is a sensory diet? How do you go about making friends? Like all of these things that escaped me for so long, I finally had answers to. But at the same time, because of my extreme pattern recognition, I had to shut a lot of my externalities down so my brain can refilter information about my life with this newfound knowledge. And I was able to go back to certain situations and go, oh, that's why I acted that way. That's why when I was at the Association of Washington Business, I was not, and I quit because they hired a new manager. I didn't have to quit. But my autistic brain was like, this has changed. This is going to change everything. So I might as well quit now because I know if I don't quit, I'm going to get fired. Now that I'm autistic, I know that if my manager changes, the end of the world is not coming. That I just need to prepare, change, tweak, and figure everything out again. But it's still going to be okay. So for several years, I did a lot of work on myself, on my relationships, on my life. And what I have found is that if I'm able to be openly autistic in life, life is easier. Now that I have a reason behind my behaviors, people are way more accepting of when I can't do things, right? When I can't go to see Timmer's event because my body and everything about it says, no, not today. Oh God, I wanted to. I just couldn't. Oh, I missed quite a show too. And I guess I'm saying all this because, life has not always been easy for me. I have had a lot of challenges along the way. And the biggest challenge I overcome was the autism. Now, there are times in my life, especially recently, where people tell me, oh, you don't look autistic. And for the longest time, I used to have a problem with that. Because I would say, like, well, what does autism mean? But then I realized somewhere along the way that that's actually, in a way, a compliment. It's a backhanded compliment that a lot of people don't realize they're doing. But a lot of the times it's based on what you see on TV. If you watch nothing but Love on the Spectrum and you think that's what autism is, well, then you're only getting about 1% of the spectrum. Because that's curated, folks. This whole idea of autism representation is something that is huge in my life now because of such a narrow view in corporate media. That token autism person, right? The show about a doctor who's severely autistic who can perform miracles and all this stuff. Yeah, that's great. But what about the 14 autistic doctors right now that don't exhibit those exact symptoms and are killing it? Those are the ones I want to see. The stories I want to see about autism representation are the people in politics, the doctors, the lawyers, the people that are successful out there. And it has nothing to do with whether they're autistic or not. So I guess at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that if you have a loved one and you suspect that they're on the spectrum, be prepared to support them in their journey. And this is not even to include what's going out there with women these days, y'all. Oh, there's a soapbox I need to get on for a second. Okay, so right now, the number of women that have been misdiagnosed as something other than autistic is off the charts. Now, a lot of people will sit up there and say, well, what's the big deal? Okay. There is a huge difference between being diagnosed as schizoaffective and autistic. Huge difference that has implications beyond compare, right? Because a diagnosis of schizoaffective and that treatment plan or treatment path is a lot different than a treatment path for somebody diagnosed with autism. Let me tell you. And the treatment path for schizoaffective is not fun. And it's basically the view on somebody that has schizoaffective or an antisocial personality versus somebody who has a lot of empathy, but the people are misunderstanding their view of empathy is huge, right? Because if you tell somebody who has a lot of empathy that their diagnosis is that of somebody that has zero empathy and that are basically sociopaths because the way they present their empathy is different than a typical male would be, that's freaking, I hate that. And it happens all the time. Like, we have policies and procedures in place that discriminate against women, period. Yet that's not a part of the conversation. I was told recently in a doctor's office, I kid you not, in 2026 that women don't require as many days of antibiotics as a dude because of, and I can't even remember, something about their body that is smaller than another part of the body. Say what? So you're denying 4 days of antibiotics because they're a woman? Yes, they're overt about it. So as of today, the medical system is discriminating against women based on a bunch of tests designed for men. It's not equitable. It's not fair. It happens all the frickin' time. Yet it's not openly discussed. It's openly discussed within the autism circles because there are countless and countless and countless women who need to go through the diagnosis process 2 or 3 times. And the first one is only covered by insurance, right? I know at least 50 women today that have had to come out of pocket thousands and thousands of dollars because their first person who diagnosed them was not using the most recent information. We have a provider in Oregon today who is diagnosing through OHP people with autism, and they say that a woman cannot have autism and ADHD at the same time. And that's the person that is testing people for autism in several places throughout the state. And the only person who's testing autism under OHP. So if the only place you can get an autism diagnosis through OHP is through somebody who is not diagnosing autism effectively, why are we doing it, folks? So that's my rant for this week. Hopefully, I'll get back to interviewing folks again soon. And hang in there, y'all. And if you or a loved one is on the autism spectrum, 2 things that I would advise. 1, if at all possible, join a support group. Get together with other people on the spectrum and check out the difference the experience is. And the second one, equally vital, equally important, find a therapist that knows something about autism. There's a little cheat for you, right? So if you're interviewing, and I recommend that you interview the therapist, right? Your first session should be you interviewing the therapist as much as the therapist interviewing you, right? Because this is a mutually beneficial partnership, and it's all about you as the patient, right? So ask him this question. Explain autism double empathy to me. And if they can't explain autism double empathy, you may want to ask for a different therapist. As a matter of fact, what I did when I found the therapist that I have is I asked that question of the registrant, saying, I'm looking for a therapist, and the first thing I need is for them to explain the double empathy problem to me. And that way I knew our first session was going to include that explanation, and boy, did I get lucky. And I would say the name of my therapist right now, except for the fact that he is no longer practicing with patients with the exception of a few. And I don't want his office to be bombarded with phone calls for people he can't serve. That wouldn't be fair to him, and it wouldn't be fair to people. But I hope, and there's a few times I use but I hope that you're able to find somebody who can help. Because the biggest thing we need help with is translating the human experience. So I'll end this week the way I always end the week, folks. Be kind. We all live on the same planet. We breathe the same air, and this world would just be a little bit better if we treated everybody with a little kindness and respect. I love you all. Till next time.